preventive cardiology. We all have been listening very oftenly regarding uh, gestational diabetes. So I have actually prepared a few slides regarding how this gestational diabetes is important in actually prevention of diabetes and prevention of CAD in the near future. So if you see the origin of terminology gestational diabetes, how it all came, in 1954, Dr. J.P. Hoyt termed glucose intolerance that occurred in pregnancy as metagestational diabetes. This was way back in 1954. And in 1961, the famous O'Sullivan was the first to use the term gestational diabetes. And the initial concept was that the gestational diabetes was initially articulated in 1965, defined as pregnancy related glucose intolerance that remits after delivery. And if you see the definition of GDM today, is a carbohydrate intolerance of varying degrees of severity with onset or first recognition during pregnancy. So what is the pathophysiology? The basic pathophysiology is glucose intolerance that develops in the women with GDM could be the result of their inability to increase insulin secretion enough to overcome insulin resistance that occurs even in the non-diabetic pregnancy. And if you see the beta cells, the GDM represents detection of chronic beta cell dysfunction rather than development of relative insulin deficiency as insulin resistance increases during pregnancy. And if you see GDM in our population, if you see in the rural population is almost 9.9%, in semi-urban it's 13.8%, and in urban is 17.8%. And today, with the increasing age of pregnancy, with the increasing prevalence of polycystic ovarian disease, the numbers are in gestational diabetes is increasing day by day. If you see the numbers of in vitro fertilization has also increased remarkably in our country, and even that is one of the reason of increasing gestational diabetes. We are seeing more and more in urban population. If you see age more than 25 years, in this particular study was, and the BMI more than 25 with family history of diabetes. So the average prevalence of GDM, irrespective of area, was 13.9%. This is our own data published way back in 2009. And our pioneer in gestational diabetes, Dr. Seshaya Group. Hyperglycemia in pregnancy, why it is relevant. This is what I'm going to address upon today. Because of the high risk of maternal and perinatal morbidity and mortality and poor pregnancy outcome, offspring of gestational diabetes pregnancy at high risk of metabolic problems, including type 2 diabetes mellitus, and identifies women at high future risk of diabetes and CVD, and it offers an opportunity of primary prevention. And GDM implications is that women with GDM have an increased lifetime risk of developing diabetes at over 3 times compared to controls at 16 years after index pregnancy. And the most important thing is this is preventable. And by 17 years of age, 1/3 of offspring of diabetic mothers have had evidence of IGT or type 2 diabetes mellitus. So this is again a very important message for all of us where we need to address upon. So two generations are at risk, mother and her offspring. Born big long-term complications, if you see, from intrauterine excess food intake to obesity, diabetes, and CVD as a risk in future. And the developmental origin of adult disease, the Barker's hypothesis, we all have heard many times. 1989, David Barker, inverse relationship between birth weight and death from heart disease in England and Wales. And if you see the data from the Dutch hunger winter, the food supply to the Netherlands was cut off by Nazis, and the individuals born during this time had increased insulin resistance. And if you see the birth weight less than 2.5 kg, the hazard ratio was almost 3.63. And that is how he actually came up with an hypothesis that people, babies who are born with lower birth weight are at an increased risk of coronary heart disease, hypertension, and type 2 diabetes and obesity. So this gives us an idea that how important it is to manage gestational diabetes pretty well. Again, the Dohad hypothesis, the developmental origin of health and disease hypothesis, proposes that environmental conditions during fetal and early postnatal development influences lifelong health and capacity through permanent effects on growth, structure, and metabolism. And this has been called as programming. So this is how it is in the womb's shadow: gametogenesis, conception, birth, weaning, growth, maturation, reproduction, aging. At all stages, we have environmental factors which could be endocrine disruptors, nutrition and IVF conditions during conception and birth, uteroplacental insufficiency, nutrition could be impaired, maternal stress could be another features, and another during weaning. After birth, it could be nutritional factors and maternal behavior, especially postpartum weight gain is again a very big challenge in our country. So the development origins of disease, if you see from gestation to childhood to puberty to reproductive age, middle life, and later in life, every stage we need to have a good focus on preventive etiology, so that we can prevent gestational diabetes, we can prevent later on diabetes, and we can prevent later on all the possible complications related to insulin resistance syndrome. And if you see the stages of prenatal and postnatal organ development, this is also very, very important in actually giving prognostic during gestational diabetes. If you see the early prenatal age, there is the development of CNS starts from third week of pregnancy fetus to 20 years of age. Ear is 4 to 20 weeks, kidney is 4 to 40 weeks, heart 3 to 8 weeks, adipose tissue from mid late prenatal to postnatal. Immune system, which is very much talked about today, develops during 8 to 40 weeks of gestation. Competence and memory birth almost up to 10 years. Skeletal development is first 12 weeks. Lungs is 3 to 40 weeks, and alveoli from birth to 10 years. So reproductive system from 7 to 40 weeks, and maturation in puberty. So this is a very, very important chart to understand that at which age the patient is having gestational diabetes and what is the status of glycemic control. You can predict what future course of abnormalities this patient can have for their fetus. Now, this is again a very, very important slide to understand that how the mother's diet and nutrition stores, mother's ability to mobilize and transport nutrition, supply lines to the fetus, uterine blood flow, placental structure and function, all this actually contribute for the nutritional supply to the fetus. And this actually needs to comply on the demand from the fetus. And if it doesn't, if this demand is not met, there could be fetal undernutrition. And this can be a future course that can lead to inadequate building blocks of kidneys, livers, pancreas, muscle mass, brain, even hypothalamic pituitary axis can be abnormal. There could be hyperlipidemia, hypertension, central obesity, insulin resistance. So this is what is we are talking about, that a good nutrition to the fetus is very, very important in the intrauterine life. And there is always a link between maternal health and NCDs. Maternal undernutrition leads to maternal stunting, anemia, malaria, other medical conditions, low birth weight, Barker hypothesis, predicts development of IGT, type 2 diabetes, hypertension. And if you see the fetus macrosomia, Pedersen's hypothesis, so all these things will later lead to a poor maternal and fetal outcome. So we have data to support that treating lowers the risk of perinatal complications. All these complications, which are very, very common during gestational diabetes, can be lowered. And beta cell function declines within 2 years postpartum in women. So this is also very, very important that postpartum follow-up should be very, very good in patients who have delivered with a history of gestational diabetes. And if you see the GDM and incidence of diabetes in 5 years following index pregnancy in South Indian women is pretty high. That previous GDM has a diabetes of 37% compared to non-GDM has diabetes of 2%, and the same age group. Even the metabolic syndrome is very, very high, 60% compared to metabolic syndrome, 26% in non-gestational diabetes. So the rate of development of type 2 diabetes in Indian women is consistent with other countries. And incidence of GDM in urban India is around 16%. Thus, screening for GDM and following up postpartum diabetes testing will offer early detection and possible intervention. So how do we screen and diagnose? The screening test recommended by O'Sullivan and Mahan was 50-gram oral glucose, and it was administered in the fasting or non-fasting state with a screen positive criteria of 1 hour more than 140 milligram per deciliter. But the drawback of this test was that the woman had to stay in the antenatal clinic for 1 hour. Hence, we wanted to assess a walk-in glucose test. And that is how we designed a gold standard for diagnosis of GDM in OGTT. That in 1980s at the Institute of Obstetric and Gynecology, almost 16,000 deliveries occurred every year. And to diagnose GDM, uh, Dr. Seshaya group actually performed a spot test, and this spot study was published that normal fasting plasma glucose never exceeded 90, and non-fasting plasma glucose did not exceed 120 in this number of patients. So the screening test had a better sensitivity and specificity compared to O'Sullivan's screening test. So what does the spot test mean for spot test for plasma glucose is a convenient screening test for detection of glucose intolerance during pregnancy in the community. And however, the progress to a test to serve as a tool for both screening and diagnosing universally. If you see the ADA criteria, the ADA has a very selective criteria of picking up high risk group for gestational diabetes like age, family history, obesity, uh, bad obstetric history, glucose intolerance in the previous pregnancy. So they actually do screening for only high risk pregnancies, not for everyone. By traditional risk factor screening, 27.7% of GDM cases would be missed. So by risk factor screening, 35% of the GDM cases have been missed in our study. So compared with risk factor based screening recommended by ADA, universal screening for GDM detects more cases and improves maternal and offspring prognosis. And what does the universal screening testing do? The universal's earliest testing in population with high prevalence of type 2 diabetes. Indian women have 11-fold increased risk of developing glucose intolerance during pregnancy compared to Caucasian women. And if you see among ethnic groups in South Asian countries, Indian women have the highest frequency of GDM. So all women should be screened for gestational diabetes, even if they have no symptoms or no risk factors according to new recommendations. And this is the published data among 891 women who had 75 gram OGTT, 168 were diagnosed as GDM, taking both FPG and 2-hour postprandial glucose as more than 140 as cutoff. Taking only 2-hour postprandial glucose for analysis, 144 had a value of more than 140. So it's a very, very interesting data which was published recently. And WHO again standardized the diagnosis of GDM, and they propose of using 75 gram OGTT with a threshold postprandial glucose of more than 140 at 2 hours, similar to those of impaired glucose tolerance during non-diabetic population. So one-step procedure for screening and diagnosis of gestational diabetes mellitus, simple glucose challenge test with 75 gram oral glucose, and diagnosing GDM if 2-hour postprandial glucose is more than 140. And this can be done at any time, irrespective of the last meal. This is also very, very important that the 2-hour postprandial glucose more than 140 with 75 gram oral glucose administered in pregnant women in the fasting or non-fasting state without regard to the time of the last meal is able to identify women with gestational. And the practical problems in diagnosing GDM is all the diagnostic criteria require women to be in fasting. And this is very, very important. That is, the drop-off rates were very, very high because of this, and attending the first prenatal visit in the fasting state is impractical in many settings. So a fasting blood test at the antenatal booking is often inconvenient even in place like UK. So the rationale is after a meal, a normal glucose tolerant woman would be able to maintain euglycemia despite glucose challenge due to brisk and adequate insulin response, whereas a woman with GDM who has impaired insulin secretion will not. So that is how this cascading effect is advantageous, as this would not result in false positive diagnosis of GDM. So thus, performing a single test is very, very easy and convenient, and it actually picks up GDM in the early stage of pregnancy. And this is the national guidelines which was published in 2014, and which categorically mentioned that a single step testing should be done for screening of all ladies coming to the antenatal clinic. Glycosylated hemoglobin could also be used for patients who have been documented to have high postprandial glucose during screening. And if HbA1c is less than 5.23, and that is normal. If HbA1c is between 5.3 to 6, needs attention. And if HbA1c is more than 6, could be GDM or pre-GDM. So this is what is very, very important. Now, diagnosis is the most important step in GDM. And after diagnosis, you need to treat and address the issues with the pregnant lady and the spouses. Now, fasting more than 120 and postprandial more than 200, insulin from outside is not needed. Most of the gestational diabetic patients respond to therapeutic lifestyle management and advise therapeutic lifestyle care and SMBG for initial 1 to 2 weeks. If majority of the fasting is more than 3 out of 7 or post meal more than 6 or beyond targets, then only we should start insulin. And let me tell you, there are a lot of confusions regarding oral drugs, regarding insulin therapy. I think today in gestational diabetes, the safest thing is to start insulin therapy. 2 to 4 units of short acting or a pre-mixed insulin should be started before breakfast as an initiation of insulin. And the patient should be very much taught about monitoring and adjusting the dose. We usually give short acting or a rapid acting insulin before each meals, and we ask them to monitor for the first week, and accordingly we titrate the dose for further control. The most important thing is we need to tell our patients that what is your target values. So monitoring is the key during pregnancy. You should ask for ASMBG to all our pregnant ladies who are on insulin therapy or even on dietary therapy to do daily blood sugar testing. Fasting should be done by rotation, fasting pre-meals, and even 1 hour and 2 hour sugars should be done. And these are the targets which should be maintained. The pre-meal sugar, that is fasting, pre-lunch and pre-dinner, should be less than 95. 1 hour should be less than 140, and 2 hours should be less than 120. This is what is been recommended. And for pre-GDM, the pre-meals bedtime should be between 60 and 99. The peak post meal should be between 100 and 129. This is what is the target even recommended by ADA. And HbA1c should not be tested in most of the patients. Ideally, HbA1c should be done in patients who have been picked up in the first trimester to actually look if they were undiagnosed pre-diabetic, or probably they are just picked up for the first time. Ideally, the A1C target in pregnancy is less than 6. If this can be achieved, most of the times fructosamine test has been recommended during pregnancy. That is also very, very useful, but it is not available everywhere. Preconception care is very, very important. If you are actually seeing a patient beforehand at a very high risk, the amount of time spent in preconception care correlates with pregnancy outcome, and safe motherhood and a healthy baby is what is being focused. Target blood glucose should be fasting between 80 to 90, postprandial between 110 to 120, and the mean should be between 95 and 105. Avoid very tight control and try to avoid hypoglycemia. We heard a very good presentation before this on hypoglycemia. This is very, very important. And I tell you, most of the patients, if they can afford ambulatory glucose monitoring, you can pick up hypoglycemias and you can take care of them during pregnancy. And that actually helps in preventing things like small for gestational age is newborn. So gestational diabetes mellitus offers an important opportunity for the development, testing, and implementation of clinical strategies for diabetes prevention. This is what is very, very important today. And preventive measures against type 2 diabetes should start during intrauterine period and continue throughout the life of early childhood. So once the baby is delivered, both baby and the mother should be put on preventive therapy. So where are we today? Recommendations for follow-up. The health guidelines for prior GDM, postpartum and 1 year perform OGTT, highest risk impaired glucose tolerance, every 1 to 3 years OGTT or fasting plasma glucose or A1C. If fasting is more than 100, perform OGTT. Fasting lipid profile to actually look for things like hypertriglyceridemia. Even you should look for things like NASH. You should do a SGOT and SGPT. If the levels are more than 2.5 times normal, you should always look for other parameters of insulin resistance. Encourage healthy lifestyle, weight loss, daily exercise, and plan pregnancy, the next pregnancy accordingly. This is very, very important. Strategies for primary prevention of diabetes after GDM is very, very important. And almost all the ladies usually after delivery forgets their diabetologist or a endocrinologist after the delivery. But in fact, it should be a mandatory follow-up, which should be cautioned before they deliver the baby, that after delivery, the most important thing is you should be on good diet and lifestyle modification, because in Indian scenario, most of the ladies after delivery put on a lot of weight, especially if they undergo cesarean section. They have a bed rest for a long time, and a good meal supported by their in-laws and by their parents actually make them obese after their delivery. And that is a real key area where we need to address and tell them that putting on weight is going to be very, very difficult later on, and for future prevention of diabetes and diabetes related complications. So pharmacological primary prevention for those at highest risk, those with IGT. If the lady is not continuing breastfeeding, drug agents like metformin can be continued. We have diabetes prevention programs, even the Indian prevention programs with metformin. Drugs like acarbose can be used in people who have high carbohydrate intake. Stop Anidinium study was the one which actually used acarbose and shown that prevention of diabetes could be there with acarbose. Thiazolidine diendions can be used. We had tripod study with troglitazone. We even had studies with pioglitazone. Those drugs can be used. So this can be used only in a very, very high risk group in spite of very good lifestyle management. If they don't have good glycemic control, we can use these drugs for prevention. And surgical in case of morbid obesity, like gastric bypass can be done in morbidly obese post-gestational diabetes. After gestational diabetes, most important thing is one-on-one teaching to change lifestyle. Your patient has to embrace lifestyle and dietary changes and believe they are important for them and their family. Even for the baby, it is very, very important to have a regular follow-up. It can be viewed as an unidentified pre-existing disease or the unmasking of a compensated metabolic abnormality by the added stress of pregnancy or a direct consequence of the altered maternal metabolism stemming from the changing hormonal milieu. So the points to pointer is early diagnosis of glucose intolerance in pregnancy, best possible strategies to achieve euglycemia in pregnancy, postpartum follow-up of mother and offspring of diabetic mother, and to apply primary prevention strategies to both of them. This is what is very, very important to actually reduce the burden of both diabetes and uh, metabolic syndrome, definitely coronary artery disease as well. So I thank you all for your patient listening, and I thank the organizers for this opportunity.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
My wonderful talk. One question is a differential diagnosis of hyperglycemia in pregnancy. New onset type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes and monogenic diabetes should be screened, should be differentiated at the time of pregnancy, because the treatment plan of monogenic diabetes and the gestational diabetes are, in my opinion, is different. Your opinion, please.
Yes, sir, it's a really very good question, Dr. BK Singh, and I thank you for that particular question. Definitely, there could be unmasking of type 1 diabetic in during pregnancy, and most of the time they present with diabetic ketoacidosis during pregnancy. So it is very, very important. They don't present like they don't need a usual screening. They present in the emergency with the diabetic ketoacidosis if they have subclinical type 1 diabetes, and when they become pregnant, they present with DKA. Secondly, there could be a pre there could be a type 2 diabetes which are undiagnosed before the pregnancy. So as I said, if they are picked up gestational diabetes in the first trimester, you can do a HbA1c levels. You will find that an HbA1c level of 10% and 11%, and that means that this lady had an undiagnosed type 2 diabetes before pregnancy, and after the pregnancy she has been picked up. As far as monogenic diabetes is concerned, definitely the treatment doesn't differ. And at this particular time, the most important thing is maintaining the hyperglycemia and maintaining the all the hyperglycemic features in that particular gestational diabetic lady. And insulin is going to be the drug of choice in that particular patient. Once the lady has delivered, and then you can definitely make the differential diagnosis of monogenic diabetes on the basis of the family history. Because if you see most in our study as well, the Indian study which was there, the family history of diabetes is included there. But that family history of diabetes is not included to actually classify different types of diabetes that can be done later on during the course of treatment as in the postpartum period. You can send a sample for genetic testing to any laboratory to actually document monogenic diabetes.
One thing I want to stress at this point that in monogenic diabetes, particularly the glucokinase deficiency,
Yes, sir.
if the heritability from the mother and the father to the children is different, if the
Yes, sir.
father is suffering from monogenic diabetes and the fetus is suffering from monogenic diabetes, and the mother is suffering from monogenic diabetes, and the outcome of fetal the fetal weight is different in different circumstances. So, what is your opinion in that particular?
In that
this
case,
glucokinase deficiency?
we need to have a lady who is already a diabetic, monogenic diabetes. We are not talking about a lady who is already a diabetic. We are talking about gestational diabetes who is not a known diabetic. At this particular time of presentation, we are talking about a lady who has been diagnosed diabetic for the first time. We don't have a history of monogenic diabetes in this particular presentation. So if you know that the lady
Thank
is
you.
having a monogenic diabetes, the father is having already a diabetes, in that case, definitely we need to have a good counseling and plan for the pregnancy, for the future of the child, like we do in a Down syndrome, like we do in a Turner syndrome, or like we do in thalassemia minor patients. If a lady is a thalassemia minor, we definitely screen the husband for thalassemia minor to actually not get a thalassemia major baby in that particular case. So that is how it should be.
Thank
the
you. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Vinay,
you.
for a wonderful talk.
Thanks, sir. Wonderful.
We'll go to the last session for the day, and that's the insulin symposium. We have got three wonderful speakers.